What's the most shocking thing you found when moving into a new house? I'd just moved into this old brownstone apartment in Brooklyn. The place was built in like 1920 and had all this vintage charm with original hardwood floors and crown molding. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but I figured that was just because the radiator clanged like a ghost was trapped inside. I decided to throw a housewarming party to meet people in the neighborhood and show off my new place. My buddy Miles brought this girl named Sydney. The second she walked in, I couldn't stop staring. She had these thick-rimmed glasses and curly red hair pulled back in a messy bun. She wore this oversized green sweater that made her look cozy and approachable. Every time I tried to walk over and introduce myself, someone would pull me away to talk about the apartment or ask where the bathroom was. I spent the whole night doing reconnaissance on her like some kind of weird spy. I overheard her telling my friend Janet that she worked as a graphic designer for a startup in Manhattan. Score one for common ground since I worked in tech too. Then I heard her mention to Miles that she'd just gotten out of a long relationship and was enjoying being single. My stomach did this weird flip thing. The party got more crowded as the night went on. People were everywhere drinking cheap wine and eating the fancy cheese I'd bought to seem sophisticated. I kept catching Sydney looking at me from across the room. She'd smile and then look away real quick like she was embarrassed. My roommate from college kept pushing me to go talk to her, but I was being a complete chicken. Around 11 o'clock, I was in the kitchen mixing drinks when I saw her standing by my bookshelf. She was reading the spines and nodding like she approved of my collection. This was it. This was my moment. I grabbed 2 beers and started walking toward her, trying to think of something clever to say about books or design or literally anything that wouldn't make me sound like an idiot. That's when I noticed she was walking toward me too. We were both smiling and doing that awkward thing where you're not sure if you should wave or just keep walking. We met right in the middle of my living room next to this vintage rug I'd bought at a flea market. I opened my mouth to say hi. Then the floor disappeared. Not the whole floor. Just this perfect circle right where Sydney was standing. 1 second she was there smiling at me, and the next second she was gone. Just dropped straight through like a cartoon character. The old wooden boards had completely given way and left this gaping hole in my living room. Everyone started screaming. I dropped the beers and rushed to the edge of the hole. Sydney was lying on the floor below, surrounded by broken wood and insulation, but that wasn't even the worst part. My downstairs neighbor, Mr. Gentry, was standing there completely naked, dripping wet from his shower. He started yelling about lawsuits and property damage while trying to cover himself with a tiny hand towel. Someone called 911 while I climbed down through the hole to check on Sydney. She was conscious, but her leg was bent at this weird angle. She looked up at me and said, "Well, this is one way to make an entrance." Even in pain, she was trying to make jokes. The paramedics showed up in like 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. They had to use the stairs because obviously the floor route wasn't safe anymore. Everyone cleared out of my apartment pretty quick after that. Nothing kills a party vibe like structural collapse and potential lawsuits. Turns out Sydney broke her hip in the fall. Mr. Gentry was fine physically, but emotionally scarred from having a girl crash through his ceiling while he was naked. He sued me and my landlord for emotional distress and property damage. The landlord tried to blame me for having too many people over, but the building inspector found out the floor joists were completely rotted from a leak that had been ignored for years. I visited Sydney in the hospital the next day with flowers and an apology that seemed way too small for what happened. She was in good spirits considering everything. We talked for hours about books and design and how she'd never trust vintage flooring again. When I was leaving, she grabbed my hand and said, "You still owe me that beer."